Hi folks, HR Funk here, back again with my FN Model 509 pistol. Now you may recall I did a full review on this pistol a couple of weeks ago, and at the end of that review I noted that the Model 509 has a lot of very great characteristics. One of those great characteristics though is not the quality of its trigger pull, which I also mentioned at the end of that review. After I finished that video I started thinking about FN pistols, and it occurred to me there was another very famous FN pistol that was designed for the military, just like the Model 509 was, and that became one of the most popular military pistols around the world in the 20th century, and it also has a lot of great features and characteristics, but one of those great features or characteristics is not the trigger pull. Do you sense a pattern developing here? I'm speaking, of course, about the FN-produced GP35 high-power pistol that was marketed here in the United States by the Browning Company. And I thought, as I was mulling over those two pistols and some of the similarities between them, it might be really interesting to do a video where I compare the two. Now, the Model 509, of course, was originally designed for last year's U.S. Army handgun trials, and the GP35 was originally designed at the behest of the French military back in the 1920s, and ultimately, as I said a couple of minutes ago, was released and became very popular with military organizations around the world. The high-power pistol, after 85 plus years of manufacture, was discontinued last year, the same year that the Model 509 was originally produced. So I saw this sort of as FN handing off its military pistol production, or at least the military pistol it's producing for the world, from the GP35 high power to the Model 509. And that being the case, I thought a comparison between the two seemed appropriate. Since I've already made past videos on both the P35 high power and the FN Model 509, and in those previous videos I discussed the history and development, etc., I'm not going to go back and reiterate that information in this video. If you're interested in learning what I said in those videos, by all means go back and watch them. I did, however, think that a discussion of the dimensional differences and similarities between the P35 and the FN Model 509 was appropriate to our discussion today. What I have with me at the moment is my FN manufactured, Browning marketed P35 high power pistol. The high power has an overall length of 7 3/4 inches, a barrel length of 4 5/8 inches. It is just over 5 inches high, 5.02 inches high, and it is 1.4 inches thick. The weight of the high power comes in right at 2 pounds. It is 32 ounces. It feeds from a double column magazine that historically has held 13 rounds, although there are magazines that are available today that have a 15 round capacity. The construction of the high power, other than the plastic grips, is all steel. Steel slide and barrel, steel frame, and the finish is a rust and corrosion resistant black epoxy. Shifting gears to the Model 509, it has an overall length of 7.4 inches, a barrel length of 4 inches, a height of 5.56 inches, so it's actually a half an inch taller than the P35 high power. The width of the Model 509 is 1.35 inches, so just slightly thinner than the high power. The 509 also feeds from a double column magazine, and in this case it has a magazine capacity of 17 rounds. The Model 509 has a steel slide and barrel, and of course a polymer frame. The weight of the Model 509 is 26.9 ounces, or let's just call it 27 ounces. So when we compare the two pistols side by side, the difference in overall length becomes very apparent, that being about 0.35 inches, and you can see that there. The 509 is significantly shorter than the high power, but it is also significantly taller. If I line up the magazine base plates, you can see just how much taller the Model 509 is than the P35. Now that almost certainly comes as a result of the 4 rounds greater ammunition capacity, that the Model 509 enjoys over the P35. But also, when we look at the overall length again, that does come at a bit of a cost when we look at sight radius. The high power has a sight radius of just over 6¼ inches, whereas the Model 509 has a sight radius of just over 5¾ inches. So about a ½ inch advantage in sight radius goes to the high power. When it comes to weight, the Model 509 is measurably lighter than the P35, on the order of 5 ounces lighter. But one of the things I notice as I hold the two is the balance of the high power has always been so good, and the pointability is so good, that I don't notice that advantage as much when I'm actually pointing the two. The Model 509 is lighter, and I can feel that difference, but I just don't mind the added weight of the high power, and I've mentioned this in every video that I've ever made where I'm talking about the high power pistol. It just points so naturally and fits my hand so well that I just don't mind the extra weight. Now maybe if I was carrying it on a holster somewhere on my body, over time I would notice that weight more, but definitely in my hand the high power feels very good. So I'm going to give advantages on pointability and shooter interface to the high power because it is just so tremendous, and it's just as good now as it was 87 years ago, the first time a shooter actually gripped it and fired it. I suppose in all fairness, I do have to give points to the Model 509 for its grip design, and I'm talking specifically about the texture of the grip. It is very grippable, if you will, and also it secures the pistol in your hand very well and keeps it pretty much right in position as you're shooting it, largely because of that grip texture. So gripability, or maybe I should say grip quality points, go to the Model 509. The sights between the two pistols are very comparable. They both use 3-dot systems. The P35 always uses more of 3 white bars as opposed to the 3 dots that are used by the Model 509. The Model 509 does enjoy an advantage when it comes to sights in terms of the luminescence of the sights. Now I mentioned this in my first video, and if I turned the lights off again, the sights on the Model 509 that I have here would glow for a period of time, and you can get them from the factory with tritium night sights, which are going to glow for as long as the sights last, for years. And that is one advantage that the 509 has over the P35 high power, so I have to give points for the sights to the Model 509. In terms of ammunition capacity, the advantage comes down to simple arithmetic, folks. And as I said a little while ago, the Model 509 has a magazine capacity of 17 rounds, and the classic P35 high power has an ammunition capacity of 13 rounds. So the advantage for ammunition capacity comes down to the Model 509, and in a pistol intended for military use, more bullets in the gun are almost always a better thing. When we compare the finish between the two pistols, the Model 509 has the nitro-carburized finish, and the P35 has a black epoxy finish on all the metal surfaces. Both of these finishes are intended to provide abrasion resistance and also resistance to rust and corrosion. Now, it would probably take a metallurgist or someone who specializes in metal coatings to tell which one of these is more resistant to abrasions and rust and corrosion. I'm not a metallurgist or a specialist in metal coatings, so I'm basically going to call this a draw. Both pistols have a rust, corrosion, and abrasion resistant coating or finish. In terms of ease of charging the pistol, both pistols have rear cocking serrations on the slides, if I can get the light so it can be seen. They are finer serrations on the P35 than they are on the Model 509, and of course the 509 also has front cocking serrations. So when it comes to ease of charging the pistol, I think the advantage is going to go to the 509 on that, although that said, I've never had a problem charging the P35. The Model 509 also has the 1913 standard Picatinny accessory rail on the front, and of course the P35 has no means for attaching any accessories to the pistol without modifying the pistol itself, so advantages for accessorizing go to the Model 509. How about simplicity of operation? The P35 is a classic single-action semi-automatic pistol, meaning that when a round is cycled into the chamber, the hammer stays cocked, and if the pistol is not immediately to be fired, the thumb safety has to be engaged so that the pistol can be carried in a holster safely in this condition, and if the trigger is inadvertently pressed, the pistol will not fire until that thumb safety is disengaged, at which time it will fire that chambered round and every other round in the magazine unless or until the thumb safety is reapplied. By contrast, the Model 509 follows the function of most modern semi-automatic pistols, or maybe I should say most modern polymer frame semi-automatic pistols, meaning that when a round is cycled into the chamber, the pistol can be carried safely in this mode. There is no safety that needs to be applied or disengaged before the pistol will fire. Now it does have the articulated trigger, which functions rather as a drop safety, and it also has an internal striker block to keep the pistol from being fired unless or until the trigger is pulled completely to the rear. But otherwise, there are no safeties that have to be physically manipulated, applied, or disengaged before the pistol can be used. So points for simplicity of use go to the Model 509 as well. While we're on the topic of safeties, I have to discuss the magazine disconnect of the P35 high power. When this pistol is fired, or in order for this pistol to be fired, the magazine does have to be in place. If the pistol is cocked and the magazine is removed, the pistol will not fire. This, by the way, is the main thing that detracts from the trigger pull quality of the P35 because the magazine disconnect is built into the trigger. In order to fire the P35, we have to have our magazine installed and locked in place, and at that point the pistol will fire. The Model 509 has no such magazine disconnect. Now you see the magazine is out of the pistol and the pistol will fire without the magazine in place. Now it depends on who you talk to as to whether or not the magazine disconnect feature or safety is a positive attribute of a firearm or a negative attribute of a firearm. Some people prefer to have that with the idea that if the magazine is removed from the pistol, they don't have to worry about it being fired, and even some police officers will have firearms that have a magazine disconnect with the idea that if they're fighting for their firearm with someone, if they can release that magazine, even if they lose control of it, the pistol cannot be used against them. Other people want no such disconnect in their firearm. They want the firearm to be capable of firing whether the magazine is in place or not. Those folks are worried that in the midst of a reload, if there's one round in the pistol before they can get another magazine in place and they have to fire the pistol, they want it to be capable of firing with the magazine removed. As I said, opinions go either way. I think I'm going to call this one a draw because there are so many differences of opinions. But I did want to illustrate the difference between the magazine disconnect of the high power and the lack of magazine disconnect in the Model 509. Interestingly, that magazine disconnect feature is one of the things that was specified by the French military in their requirements for the handgun that eventually led to the development of the P35 high power. One other similarity about safeties in these two pistols is that both of them have an internal safety. In the case of the 509, it is a striker block, and in the case of the P35, it is a firing pin block that keep these pistols from being fired unless or until the triggers are pulled all the way to the rear. One notable difference between the two pistols is the fact that the P35 high power was never rated for +P ammunition, whereas the Model 509 is. So in terms of being able to use more powerful ammunition, the advantage does go to the Model 509. Another advantage, the Model 509 enjoys is the polished feed ramp and chamber, which is not present in the P35 high power. Now, that being said, the P35 has always been known for its reliability. So whatever advantage the 509 enjoys in those terms is probably minimal, but it is still an advantage. So I wanted to mention it for this comparison. How about ease of field stripping and maintenance? The high power is a very simple pistol to field strip. You simply lock the slide all the way to the rear so that the safety is now in this disassembly notch. At that point, you can raise up slightly on the slide stop and push it out from this side. Once that's done, you can ease the slide and barrel forward, while at the same time making sure you capture the recoil spring. Turn the pistol over, remove the recoil spring and recoil spring guide, and the barrel then lifts out of the slide. Very simple to disassemble the P35. It reassembles in reverse order. Barrel goes in. One thing you do have to be cognizant of when you reinstall the recoil spring assembly is that this surface right here is pointed upward, or I should say upward as the slide is being held upside down. It has to be in this sort of an orientation. If you install this the wrong way, it can damage the pistol when it's fired. At that point, the slide can be reinstalled onto the frame, and that disassembly notch conveniently holds the slide to the rear, at which time the slide stop can be reinstalled, and the pistol is reassembled and ready for use. Even with as simple as the field stripping procedure is for the P35, it's even easier for the Model 509. With the Model 509, we simply lock the slide to the rear, rotate the disassembly tab forward, release the slide, and as it comes forward, depress the trigger, and the slide comes forward off the frame, at which point the recoil spring assembly can be removed, and the barrel comes out right after it. When we reassemble it, we also have the advantage of not having to be concerned about the orientation of the recoil spring assembly. We simply put it back in, slide it into its notch, reinstall the slide on the frame, pull it all the way to the rear, lock it to the rear, rotate the disassembly lever back up, and the pistol is reassembled. Maintenance on either pistol is not difficult. The P35 does require a little bit more lubrication than the 509, but otherwise the only real advantage that the 509 enjoys, and it's a slight advantage, is in ease of disassembly and probably more importantly, ease of reassembly. One thing I want to touch on is the service life of these two pistols. The 509 is built like a tank, and it is built to last a long time through many, many thousands of rounds, whereas the P35 has a reputation for having about a 35,000 round life cycle before it really gets to the point where it needs to be replaced. The Model 509 should go far, far beyond that. So in those terms, the Model 509 does have an advantage in durability, or at least maybe I should say reported durability, over the classic P35 high power. Okay folks, I put it off long enough. Let's check the trigger pull weights on our two pistols today. I'm going to start with the Model 509, and as I mentioned before, this is not my favorite trigger on any firearm that I've ever tried in my life. I have tested it several times between the last video and today, and it's been weighing between about 6 3/4 and 7 pounds. So let's see where it's going to break today. And here we go. Well, we're over 7 pounds for that pull. 7 pounds 4 ounces. I'm going to try it one more time. And I mentioned last week, the trigger on this pistol is not very consistent. It has a tendency to go heavy on one pull and lighter on the next pull. So let's see where it is this time. That time we're up to 7 pounds 10 ounces. So for whatever reason, it's weighing heavy today. I've had several pulls that were down in the 6 pound 11 ounces, 6 pounds 12 ounces range, which is really what throws you off when you're shooting it, because you get used to the heavier trigger pull and then all of a sudden you get a light one, or you get a few light ones in a row and then all of a sudden you get a heavy one. And it really is a challenge to try to shoot this accurately when you're doing any kind of defensive drill. So I'm going to try one more pull on the 509. And that time we came in under 7 pounds, 6 pounds, 14.4 ounces. So now let's try the P35 and see where it's breaking. And here we go. As I said before, the trigger in my Mark III P35 here is completely stock. It still has the magazine disconnect in place. So let's see where it breaks. £5 pounds, 5.4 ounces. For all the criticism the trigger gets on the P35 from a lot of different shooters, the one in this pistol is pretty good. Let's try that one more time. £5 pounds, 4.8 ounces. So the advantage that I'm going to give the high power trigger is not so much that it's lighter than the 509, but it is consistent. Normally this trigger breaks right in that 5 pounds, 4 ounces, 5.5 ounces range, and it stays very consistent, which makes it very easy to shoot, particularly quickly when I'm just lining up the sights and squeezing off a shot, rather than having to think about my trigger press and watch the sights like I have to with the 509. The last thing I want to mention here in the shop is the cost difference between these two pistols. When the P35 high power manufacture ceased last year, the Mark III pistol, like the one I'm holding right here, had a manufacturer's suggested retail price of over $1,100. Whereas the Model 509 currently has an MSRP of about $650. So when we look at a military purchase or a purchase for a large police organization where many pistols are going to be acquired, there is a very big advantage going in terms of the Model 509. Now maybe that's not surprising when we consider the fact that a major portion of the Model 509 is created in a mold, whereas virtually everything on the P35 high power, with the exception of the plastic grips, have to be machined. So we do see the reason behind that cost, but when we look at, again, a purchase for a very large organization, the advantage definitely goes to the Model 509. And that is about as much of this comparison as I can perform here in the shop. In part 2 of this video, we'll head out to the range and continue our evaluation of the 509 to determine if it's a worthy successor to the P35 high power, or if the P35 still maintains its title as FN's premier military pistol. I was originally going to make this video all one part and attach the range portion to this part, but it's now gotten so long that I think I'm going to go ahead and break it into two different halves. So that's it for this segment. If you have any questions or comments, be sure to leave those below. And as always, until next time, good shooting. And by the way, stay tuned for part 2.